Greetings, one and all, and welcome to Combat Critiques. In this installment, let's examine the fight between the Bride and Elle Driver in Kill Bill Volume 2. As per usual, let's begin by assessing both sides' motives. The Bride wants revenge for how she was attacked and injured years ago during her wedding rehearsal, doing in all members involved one by one. Elle Driver just so happens to be one of those on the list. Elle Driver has wanted to test herself against the Bride, as she mentioned just prior to this fight. In fact, she went as far as to game end the man she believed had killed her, saying that she was filled with regret that she never got to fight her. Well, now's her chance. Let's get on to the fight, shall we? So we kick things off literally with the Bride performing a flying kick from outside the trailer. Is it stylized and a bit over the top? Yes, but these movies are known for that sort of thing. I'm less concerned with the kick and more interested in the timing. How did she know exactly when Elle Driver would be leaving the trailer? This would require some precise timing to pull off. This is also a form of dropkick, as the Bride hits the ground along with her target. I generally don't like that sort of thing, as it puts you at the same disadvantage as your target. Your opponent might be stunned for a moment, but if you have to waste time getting back up, then you've lost the advantage you created by giving them time to recover. Driver then tries to draw her katana, forged by Hattori Hanzo, but is stopped from doing so when the Bride blocks her arm, forcing it back into its scabbard. This is the drawback of long blades in confined spaces. You may not have room to adequately maneuver it. This is why shorter blades, like a wakizashi, would be carried indoors, as they won't hit walls or other obstructions in cramped quarters. If we're going with any sword, then even something like a Roman gladius would be great for this as well. The Bride makes good on her advantage as well, delivering a punch across Driver's jaw. Jaw strikes can be quite effective, as the force can travel along it and deliver some serious head trauma. Knockouts can happen semi-frequently this way. Driver had committed so hard to drawing her weapon that she was blindsided and couldn't counter this. She responds by delivering a strike to the side of the Bride's head with the scabbard. While not lethal, that certainly wouldn't feel good, and can stun an enemy long enough for you to set up something else. This does send the Bride into the opposite wall, and Driver again tries to draw her sword. But the problem I just mentioned arises as Driver doesn't have enough room to draw the blade, as it gets stuck on the wall behind her. Knowing that a blade will be much more deadly than unarmed strikes, the Bride knows that she can't let that weapon be drawn if she can avoid it, and so she kicks the scabbard, forcing it back onto the sword. Really some nice moves here. The Bride then delivers another hand strike, and we don't really get a good look at what it was, but it looks to have been delivered with almost all arm without getting the rest of her body into it. That's not inherently bad, but Driver goes sprawling from it, which isn't as likely to happen in that case. The Bride goes in for another punch, but Driver's getting her head in the game and deflects the strike with the scabbard's length. That's something more commonly seen with polearms, but it works just as well here. Creative thinking, I like that. She proceeds to do the same thing against the Bride's second attack, but both sides have to be careful here. You can't just use the same tactics over and over again, or your opponent will be able to counter them more easily. There is the strategy of deliberately doing that though, until they come to expect it, but then you switch up your strike at the last moment to catch them out. That has its strengths and weaknesses though. I myself have made that work more than once. Driver parries a third strike, but the Bride should be trying to use more than one limb at a time though. One strike should flow into the next, rather than being isolated attacks like she's doing. That's giving Driver more time to react. This eventually catches up with her as Driver finally strikes her across the side of the head again. She stumbles back, looking for anything to use as an improvised weapon. She opts to rip out a TV antenna, which, while not great, is better than nothing, perhaps. She again stuffs Driver's attempt to draw her katana and then strikes her across the face in turn, then across each shoulder. While this certainly wouldn't be deadly, it would likely hurt, which can sometimes stun-lock someone. I know that when I sparred some black belts, I would get stun-locked by rapid hits that, while not enough to do damage on their own, they would keep me from doing anything by causing me to reel from them. Driver, clearly getting enraged, knocks the bride's ad hoc weapon away before again trying to draw her blade, and the bride seizes it as well, causing the two to grapple over it. The pair struggle for several moments, and this would be the perfect moment for headbutts and knees. Seriously, most people forget about elbows and knees. Those hurt immensely. And the bride is the first to realize this, kneeing Driver between the legs. Now, even though Driver is a woman, I'm told that hurts no matter what set of parts you have. Adrenaline might help offset that a bit, but that's going to cause some pain. Driver then falls back onto the counter, but maintains her hold on the sword. But it's been partially drawn, and the exposed blade is dangerously close to her neck. Now, the bride has gravity on her side, as instead of being a left-right push-pull, this is now an upwards versus downwards struggle. Driver then delivers a kick to the bride's shin though, causing her to lose her footing for a moment and letting Driver sheathe the blade again before headbutting her away. The frontal bone of your cranium makes for an effective weapon if you know what you're doing. The bride staggers, and given the blood around her nose, it would look like that's where she was struck. Not a game ender, but a bloody nose could make it difficult to breathe after a while, and the blood could weaken her grip if it gets on her hands. The pair then have the same idea of trying to kick each other, and both succeed, sending each of them to the ground. It reminds me of when an opponent and I would end up shin-kicking each other. That's not fun, I can tell you. Improvising again, the bride takes a hold of a lamp and smashes it against the side of Driver's head, and that would definitely be more effective than a TV antenna. She misses her next strike though, hitting the wall instead. While impractical for normal purposes, Driver's heels do make for an efficient foot-stomping weapon here though, and she smashes one of them down onto the bride's toes. Tarantino has a thing for that. Ugh. That heel beam would concentrate the force into a narrow area though, making it marginally more effective than a flat shoe. Driver then follows with 2 more kicks, which knock the bride back and gives her some breathing room. She makes the same mistake again though, and the bottom of her sword hits the low roof of the trailer, and she can't draw it completely. This gives the bride the chance to grab the late Bud's tobacco spit can, and she hurls its contents at Driver's face, blinding her temporarily. The bride really should have made a move here. Driver then attempts to bring the weapon down on her, but is stopped by the thrust of a chair. It knocks Driver back for a moment, but she recovers swiftly and tries to attack again, but the bride uses the remains of the chair as a shield and even disarms Driver with it. Look at this though. Driver catches the bride by surprise with a fake. The arm motion she makes causes the bride to start to bring her guard up, only to be blindsided with the kick. Very nice. The following hand strike is far too telegraphed though, and thus the bride can block it. Ah well. The second does land though, and the bride only narrowly dodges a kick to her face. Driver's finally getting focused and recovers in time to strike her again, sending her sprawling. Unfortunately for her, the bride is very good at using whatever she has to hand as a weapon and swings a guitar at her. Driver leaps over the counter as the bride cracks it over where she was not but a moment ago, before trying to leap over in pursuit. I would have advised going around, specifically because of how this leaves her exposed to Driver's kick. Driver then tries to deliver a flying kick of her own, but the problem here is how far she does this from. Once you're airborne, you can't adjust your position, and thus the bride can redirect her momentum into the wall behind. Crashing through the wall stuns Driver long enough for the bride to get her into a chokehold. This looks very much like the sleeper hold. Funny story about that. A long time ago, I was going to jump onto the back of one of my tall friends and put this on him, then immediately let go. Then I made the mistake of looking down once I was up there and realizing just how high up I was and how I didn't have a plan to get back down. My friend then started thrashing around, and I had to hang on tighter to keep from flying off. Fun times. Driver replies with an elbow, but this is a bad spot to be in. If the bride can just hang on, then that's game. Without the ability to get air, Driver will go down eventually. But she does manage to get to her feet, and while the bride loses her hold, she does manage to force Driver's head into the toilet, holding her under the water. She has escaped one problem, but is now in a very similar one. Driver does manage to get a hand free to flush the toilet though, and as the water recedes, she can breathe again for a moment. But the bride made the same mistake as Driver had been doing while trying to draw her katana. She was so focused on one task that Driver's elbow to the fork of her legs blindsides her. Driver has to take a moment to catch her breath, while the bride needs to untangle herself from the shower curtain. Driver tries to make a break for her weapon, but is seized by the bride and pulled back into the bathroom.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
The bride winds back too far though, and this gives Driver time enough to block her strike and riposte with one of her own. That was a throat strike. Ooh, that's not pleasant. The bride's response is evaded by Driver, who ducks back out into the hall. Driver uses the terrain to her advantage though, and as the bride rounds the blind corner, she strikes her again in the face, then kicks her back into the bedroom before turning to retrieve her weapon.
To my brother Bud, the only man I ever loved. Bill.
But, as it so happens, Bud had a Hattori Hanzo sword of his own, which he had lied about selling. In the universe of these films, Hanzo's swords are the best that exist and are utterly priceless in their construction, so this will allow the bride to stand toe-to-toe with Driver, who's about to grab hers.
And now I'm gonna kill you too. With your own sword, no less. Which in the very immediate future will become my sword.
Oof. Never talk about taking someone's sword. I'd be angrier about that than if someone stole my car. A car will have to be replaced in a few decades. A good sword can outlast you. This standoff reminds me of those old westerns my dad watches. They're of dubious accuracy, but some of them are actually quite entertaining. The two then rush each other and get into the bind. Now, normally, you would want to either pull your blade back so that you can mount another strike, or try to pivot your blade around the point of contact with your opponents. Both have their ups and downs. Another point of note is that neither combatant attempts to support their weapon by placing their offhand along its spine. Seeing as katanas are single-edged, this is a viable strategy and could strengthen their position. Instead, they opt for the Star Wars tactic of pushing against each other. I've never understood why other movies do this. Star Wars makes some sense, as just touching a lightsaber will do damage, but steel does not. One of the previously mentioned tactics would be more sound. But the bride manages to snatch out Driver's other eye, rendering her blind. That's rough. She even steps on it. And thus that concludes the fight, with the bride leaving Driver blinded and trapped in the trailer with the black mamba that she had used to kill Bud. Her chances of survival are slim. Overall, quite the entertaining spectacle. A bit stylized, a bit campy, but nothing egregious. There were a surprising number of good tactics put on display here, but what do you think of this fight? Do you enjoy these movies, or are they too goofy for you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.